He-Man Masters of the Universe toy fans. This is Scott ToyGuru Neitlich, the former brand manager for Masters of the Universe for about 10 years, and I'm here today to talk about the greatest unsolved mystery of toydom, one that's been addressed quite a few times by different Masters of the Universe He-Man documentaries like Toy Masters or the Power of Greyskull documentary, which is on Netflix, which I'm actually a part of, which was really cool. And of course, there was Netflix's The Toys That Made Us, the documentary that gave all of the work I did credit to Super 7. But hey, who's counting, right? The point is, they were there to discuss the question that even I've addressed on this channel previously: who created He-Man? Now, in the previous video, I talked about the conclusion being it was a group of people. It was a group effort. There is no one person that could be credited as the definitive creator of He-Man. But that's not what this video is about. So a lot of, like the people I just showed you in that last clip, it's a lot like the old movie Rashomon, where everyone kind of has their own point of view of what happened, and somehow the truth lies, shall we say, between all those point of views. Not one person is correct. Well, this video is about what I think really happened. And the reason I'm kind of able to do this, well, one, we're going to apply the whole idea of balance of probabilities, one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes quotes, meaning based on all the information we have out there, what is really most likely to have happened? I can't scientifically prove it 100%, and this video is absolutely my opinion, but based on balance of probability, this video is going to kind of try to weave everything together. And then the other thing I have going for me is the fact that I worked for Mattel. Not during the time He-Man was created, but I did brand manage Masters of the Universe for 10 years. But more importantly, I kind of have insights into the corporate culture of Mattel, and from everything I've been able to see, it was very similar back in the early 80s. So let's start in the early 80s with this memo from Ray Wagner, the president of Mattel, asking for a conference to be held at the Hacienda Hotel in El Segundo to discuss the idea of creating new boys IP. That was the letter that started it all. It's one of the cool things I found during my research. And here is the Hacienda Hotel, which ironically is across the street from the current Mattel headquarters. When they had this meeting at the Hacienda back in the early 80s, the headquarters was back in Hawthorne, so this was like 2 cities away. Kind of funny that they moved their headquarters literally next door to the hotel where He-Man was born. So definitely a lot of this information does come from, of course, Mastering the Universe, the book that Roger Sweet wrote, which, is, well, for lack of a better word, it's a little one-sided. It's definitely, he's making the case that he created He-Man, and he definitely contributed. But what we're going to do right now is sort of weave all the stories together and then overlap with that with my knowledge of Mattel culture and kind of put this all together once and for all. So Roger Sweet's contribution, he was at that meeting at the Hacienda Hotel where they had 5 different groups coming up with different boys IP, Big Jim here being the existing one, and Roger had the idea to bulk up the Big Jim figure, so he was literally made of muscle. Some other ideas were minifigures, giant figures. There was a Robin Hood concept. It's all in Roger Sweet's book. But we're just going to talk about Roger's idea because that's the one that made it out to product. So everyone submitted concepts, Roger's concept being to take Big Jim here, and he notes in his book he came in after hours, which I'm not surprised because I work Masters of the Universe Classics after hours. Some of the best work gets done after hours. And he used Super Sculpey to buff him up and turn him into that figure made of muscle. He also highly based this on his love of Frank Frazetta paintings. Like if you look at this one in particular, you can definitely see kind of where the influence of He-Man came from, especially with that helmet. So here is his very first version of what eventually became known as the He-Man Trio. This was the Barbarian version that was definitely influenced by the Frank Frazetta painting and his love for barbarians and, all of that, Conan kind of stuff. You could even see Frank Frazetta would go on to influence Masters of the Universe actually in quite a lot of ways. this painting that he did was actually replicated not once, but twice in the world of Masters of the Universe. The first time being the Powers of Greyskull issue 1, the first of what would have been a 3-part saga, and then in Classics we redid this painting again. So yeah, I mean, Frank Frazetta's paintings definitely had a major influence, and you can see that in the art and in Roger's He-Man trio. Now, to make it a trio, he also needed to have 2 other themes. So in addition to Barbarian, he created a space figure basically by buying a space figure, Boba Fett, this 1979 12-inch Boba Fett, and more or less modifying him into the space version. You can see the helmet right there, clearly taken from Boba Fett. And then the military version used a tank turret from a tank toy, and again, just kind of slapped that on the head. All of them were buffed up with that Sculpey so that they could be made of muscle. We made a homage to this figure set for the 30th anniversary by releasing them as Vicron and having him be written as, wearing different armor to intimidate his enemies, kind of like a wrestler would. And that's how he fit into the Classics world, but that's not what the story of this video is. Now, Roger Sweet has made the case many times, saying that he is the sole creator of He-Man. He absolutely created these buffed up bodies, and he was the one that came out of this meeting at the Hacienda Hotel that his concept was chosen. He also definitely came up with the name He-Man. I've actually even seen the brainstorm piece of paper where he wrote down He-Man as the name. It was also one of the cool things I found in my research. Now, Mark Taylor, also obviously a big player in the origin of Masters of the Universe, but he doesn't come into play yet, except for how Roger Sweet looked at some of his work. So here is where I'm going to try to put some pieces together. So this is Mark Taylor's work, Turok, Hero of Prehistory. So independently, Mark Taylor is a fan of barbarians. It's okay. I mean, no shocker that 2 different employees are going to be fans of the same type of genre. He did this painting in the 70s and had it hanging in his office at Mattel. Talks about this in some interviews. And it's why he claims that he came up with He-Man. But the thing is, he wasn't at the Hacienda meeting, and he didn't create those He-Man prototypes. What I believe happened, and I'm not trying to be accusatory, but I think that Roger Sweet, seeing this painting hanging in Mark Taylor's office, borrowed it without permission. The reason I think this happened, I'm not accusing Roger Sweet of something, but having worked at Mattel, I know that there's a very big kind of Machiavellian, the end justifies the means type of attitude, which was still around when I was there, where people would kind of beg, borrow, and steal things if they thought it was, for the best of the company. I once had someone grab a Lord of the Rings sword from my office that I brought in to try to pitch doing a He-Man sword, and it just disappeared from my cubicle. And I found out weeks later it was borrowed by another designer in another group who was trying to pitch something else. Never asked permission, didn't leave a note. That stuff happens all the time when people are making presentations to Mattel executives to have a new toy line. If they see something around the office, there's kind of a feeling that it is communal property, even if it's in someone's office and it's their private property. And that's kind of why I think that Roger probably saw that painting and said, oh, this would be a great addition to my pitch. And I'm not saying Roger did this maliciously. I think he did this with the right intentions. Again, that there's this attitude at Mattel that, and I'm not saying it's a bad attitude, that kind of, it's all in the good of the company. If something's lying around in someone else's office, it can assist you in a pitch. It's a free-for-all. You have the right to grab that because it's in the building. It's definitely a murky area, but I think that's where Mark Taylor's painting came in as far as the original pitch, is that Roger kind of borrowed it, I'm going to say, and that's where I think some of the feud came from, because that didn't exactly make Mark happy. So the original name was going to be Lords of Power. That was going to be how they were presented. Management thought that had a little bit of a religious connotation to it, which makes sense. You don't want to edge out any of your audience because you're naming the toy something that might be misconstrued or be offensive to any type of demographic. So a new name was needed, and Masters of the Universe was chosen. Roger Sweet definitely came up with He-Man. I don't know if he came up with Lords of Power, but he definitely did not come up with Masters of the Universe. That came out of Ray Wagner and his executive teams. All right, so the green light is to go forward with the He-Man trio, now renamed Masters of the Universe. So we basically have Roger Sweet's idea of doing bulked up figures. With this idea greenlit, that's when Mark Taylor comes in. At least this is what I've sort of pieced together. So Mark Taylor's an artist at Mattel, and he's told, hey, we like this barbarian theme. They picked the barbarian theme over the space and military. Roger's idea was to have a more of a male Barbie that could be anything, but the executives wanted to go with the barbarian theme. So that's why they brought in Mark Taylor and said, can you draw some barbarian characters for us? We like this concept that Roger has brought. We want it fleshed out. And again, this is how Mark Taylor now has the spotlight. In a way, Roger Sweet's actually almost out of it. He's not that he's been pushed out of it, but the creative ball is now with Mark Taylor, who's now creating all of these drawings of barbarian-type creatures that eventually are going to morph into He-Man, Skeletor, and Beastman here with this version of character. Obviously, it doesn't exactly look like Beastman as he wound up, but this was where the ideas were generating from. And Mark, as the artist at Mattel, was asked to flesh out this barbarian world. And he was probably chosen because people had seen this painting in his office and knew he had a love for barbarians. So essentially, Mark Sweet got management to okay the idea of doing a barbarian line, maybe by using this painting. And in return, management then went back to Mark Taylor, did the painting, and said, hey, why don't you do more paintings? So Mark Taylor continued to flesh out his barbarian hero, and he got kind of closer and closer to looking like He-Man. You can see him wearing the helmet from the Roger Sweet He-Man trio pitch, but that was going to get morphed more into a barbarian helmet pretty quickly. And, we get closer and closer to the look of what became He-Man. And you can definitely see, in Mark Taylor's Turok painting and Roger Sweet's, 3D model with the Sculpey, coming together to form this image. Now, the same thing kind of with Skeletor, but there's some other influences too that I want to string together. So this is Mark Taylor's original drawing of Skeletor, which in classics got renamed as Demo Man, which was an original name for Skeletor, was D-Man or Demo Man, like He-Man, D-Man, like a demon. Now, Mark Taylor has mentioned that the influence for this came from him seeing some skeletons at a haunted house carnival when he was a child, and that image just sort of like becoming ingrained in his mind. I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm sure it did. But there's a toy that predates Skeletor that clearly, I don't think you can say this was not an influence on him. The Big Jim line had a Skeletor with a hood and a skull face that came out a few years earlier. I don't know if Mark worked on it, but he definitely would have seen it, because you saw everyone's toy. They were always lying around, on different people's desks, on different workstations. So whether this figure jarred the memory of the skeleton from the haunted house, or the haunted house memory helped Mark create this figure and then just sort of copy paste repeat into Skeletor, that there's you can see it existed before Skeletor, and you could see the similarities. And you definitely can't, I did a whole video actually just about the Big Jim comparisons, because there's a lot more than just Skeletor. There's a ton of figures from Big Jim that you can see found their way into into MOTU. That's Trapjaw. And again, this comes from, as I said in the beginning, my having worked at Mattel and understanding the culture. A big thing that happened in the design area was reuse, rinse and repeat. Basically, if an idea worked one year, use it again another year in another line. So yeah, obviously the Big Jim toys that were lying around that were only a few years old clearly had an influence on creating the Masters of the Universe figures. So Mark Taylor, again, is continuing to refine Skeletor, drawing, several different versions until we kind of get closer and closer to what became the final version of the Overlord of Evil, and, in time became Keldor and Randor's brother and that whole thing, but that wasn't decades later. Here he was supposed to be a demon from another dimension that terrorized the heroic barbarian hero. Not much of a background beyond that. All right, and here's where we get into the other big one. The fact that right before Mattel was working on the He-Man line, they were working on a New Gods line based on the DC property from Jack Kirby. And this was basically a big reason they had that meeting at the Hacienda, because this line just wasn't working. They put a lot of work into it. And again, my knowledge from working at Mattel, I can extrapolate to what it was like back in the day. They were working on this line for years. They had all of these images and concepts all over the place on work tables and stations. And, imagine, you have this creative office and all over the walls are all these Jack Kirby drawings of Fourth World. Well, of course they're going to influence what you're doing, and work that you did for this line that didn't get picked up, well, you don't want to feel like you wasted that work. So I saw this happen all the time, and it obviously happened, in the early 80s too. Cultures don't change that much in companies where work from one line, i.e. the design of a Jack Kirby Fourth World line, basically got reused in the He-Man line. Things that they saw, things that they were working on that, didn't make it to market. Designers don't like to see their work go to waste, so they'll say, okay, I'm going to take this design. I was doing these guys riding on these giant tigers for the Jack Kirby line. Well, what giant tigers do we have? Oh, we have this panther figure from Tarzan that also got reused even more recently in the Big Jim line as the On the Tiger Trail figure. What if we take this figure and we pop He-Man on it? Hey, that'll work. And thus Battle Cat and Panther are born as repaints of the tiger originally from the Tarzan and then the Big Jim Tiger Trail toy. But you can see how, the design work they did for the Fourth World, probably creating characters riding on giant tigers and dogs, the idea of a character riding around on a tiger like that was top of mind and easy to, again, copy, paste, repeat, and do in the He-Man line they were working on. And it's also exactly the same with the vehicles. So the vehicles that they were working on for the Fourth World, again, imagine this art's all over the wall, and there's prototypes on design tables and workbenches, because they put a lot of work into this Fourth World concept before it got turned down or pushed aside. You can see that in all of the launch Masters of the Universe vehicles. Things like the giant tires, things like the animal motifs, the big kind of circular and rectangular shapes worked into the design of the vehicle. I mean, this could absolutely exist in Jack Kirby's Fourth World, and it probably might have been, it was probably modified from a Fourth World toy concept. All right, last but not least, you have Castle Greyskull. So a playset was needed, and again, when Mark Taylor was brought on after the successful pitch of the He-Man trio, the idea was to create a playset for these figures, so he drew up what he called the Well of Souls. Now, originally, with the He-Man trio, what Roger Sweet did, the idea was, again, that this was kind of a male Barbie that could wear any outfit, go to any time, any place, any theme. And in fact, he pitched the idea that there was going to be not Roger Sweet, but Mark Taylor took that concept and said, what if there's like a portal over the castle? And the portal, Mark Taylor felt, could be the place where all the enemies came from, or why he had to wear all these different outfits and what brought him to different worlds. Now, the only place this portal continued to exist was in the playmat from the vintage prototype. You can see that here in this picture, that never made it into final production. It did kind of show up in the dungeon grate a little bit, but that was the original idea that Mark Taylor had based on Roger's concept of, the main character wearing armor or outfits for any different time period and any different theme. Now, a painting like this that Mark Taylor did, where he labels it Castle Greyskull, is definitely a little bit on the tricky side, because it was not called Castle Greyskull at any point during pre-production. He could call it Castle Greyskull later on, but it wasn't until way later, when Don Gluten was brought on board to write the mini-comics, that things started having names like Castle Greyskull. It was definitely called Well of Souls or just Playset at that time. Now, years ago, Don Gluten wrote on his website that he was a little bitter that he didn't. He was basically work for hire of all the work he did on the mini comics, and he wasn't going to get any credit. He wasn't even going to get byline credit for writing the first 4 mini comics. His name wasn't even going to appear. So to kind of get credit for this, he wrote in a blog on his website, which has since been taken down, that he was going to work kind of his own names into the line, including things like the female of the line. He named her Tila based on the name of an elephant from a TV show that he really liked back when he was a kid. You can see the whole Tila review episode for Classics. I could go a little bit more into detail on that. But yeah, that's where Tila's name came from. She's named after an elephant. And this was Roger's way of working in credit for the line because he wasn't going to get byline. The other thing he did was he was given a black and white image of the castle. No idea what color it was, and it looked gray to him. So he named it Greyskull after his girlfriend at the time, Linda Gray. He also says this on his blog that was on his website. Probably took it down before he tried to sue Mattel and claim ownership of the brand, but that's not important right now. All right, so with all this behind us, did we solve it? Did we add new insight into the origin and the creation of the line? I'm hoping that, my work at Mattel giving me the insight into what the company's like, things like the idea that, oh, hey, if, something's around the office and can help me with a pitch, then it's, good for the company. Or the fact that, after the New Gods line was passed over, Ray Wagner sent out that memo and said we need to find a new way to make a boys action property, specifically to compete with Star Wars, and brought in so many different people to work on it. In the end, obviously all that matters is the brand got created and that we have these toys and it makes millions of people happy. But, with all the mystery surrounding who got credit and with everyone wanting to take credit, I kind of thought it would be good to do a pass and really give my opinion. This whole video has absolutely been my opinion. I could be wrong about all of this stuff. But based on all the facts and everything I kind of know about all the people involved and what I've read and having worked at Mattel and understanding their corporate culture, I kind of think that this is the way it happened. I could be wrong. But hey, millions of kids are happy now. And in the end, that's really all that matters, is that the brand lived on and existed. Leave me your comments. I know this video is going to be a little controversial, but hey, when does YouTube not have controversial videos, right? If you like it, give me a subscription and a like. That helps it get shown to more people and spreads the word. And see you guys around the internet for more videos.